Y Tu Mamá Tambien was filmed in 2002 but is set in 1999. At this time, Mexico had a small, wealthy middle class and a large working class, many of whom had moved to Mexico City to look for work. The largest ethnic group in Mexico were around 60% mixed mestizo, who are descendants of intermarriage between Europeans and the local Amerindian peoples of Central America. Mexico's population contains a large amount of individuals that are a mix of Mesoamerican, African, and Spanish, but there is still a small percentage of pure Indian and Spanish descendants. These groups of people tend to view themselves as superior to the hybrids, and many of the white Spanish descendants form the country's elite, holding on a majority of wealth and power. The first voiceover talks about when 3 government protests took place and a bricklayer was run over by a speeding bus. He didn't use a safe pedestrian overpass because that meant he would have to walk more and lose more work. It took 4 days for his corpse to be identified and claimed. Their names all reference a past political or historical character as well. Luisa is a Cortez, which is the name of original Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortez. Tenoch comes from Tenochtitlan, a powerful Spanish conquistador emphasizing power and elite. Julio is a Zapata, the name of the revolutionary fighter Emiliano Zapata, who was one of the leaders of the Mexican Revolution, fighting for the rights of the working and peasant class. Julio and Tenoch are separated by a class division. Julio lives with his mom and sister who both work, whereas Tenoch has a father who is a politician and lives in a house with a maid. Tenoch avoids touching anything in Julio's bathroom, and Julio always lights a match after using Tenoch's bathroom to get rid of odors. They represent the 2 main political forces in Mexico, the upper and lower middle class. Their selfishness, mainly sexual demands, prevent them from recognizing what they could achieve through cooperation. This again reflects back to Mexico's government and how really all it needs to succeed was that both parties put their selfishness aside and come together to form a holistic and ideal government.
This is where Luisa comes into play. She becomes the possibility of this European or American form of government. She is what both the boys need to come together at many points during the movie. And she also represents the relationship of Spain to Mexico. The character of Luisa is responsible for telling Julio and Tenoch that their future destinies are intertwined, similar to the way in which Spain's colonial conquest brought together the Indians and the Europeans and gave way to the creation of the mestizo. And as recently stated, mestizo refers to a person of combined European and Native American descent.
Their road trip is from urban to rural, or from sophisticated to simple, from rich to poor. Essentially, the boys can also be interpreted as Mexico as a whole. Mexico is a teenage country that still needs to find its identity, much like the boys still need to as well. As they pass several poor weddings, hometowns, police brutality, and poverty, the boys seem to not notice it. They miss all of this because they are too preoccupied fighting about petty concerns or talking about sex. When Luisa takes over the car, which symbolizes Mexico, the goal of the journey, Heaven's Mouth, becomes real, not a myth, just like the political goals of the country could become achievable.
It is interesting to see Luisa's political connection in the film because she represents a democratic or European society and knows it is real but is an unfamiliar concept in Mexico at the time. As well, symbolically, La Boca de Cielo, meaning heaven's mouth, can refer to or represent the coming of death, and at the end of the film we are informed that Luisa is diagnosed with cancer. The title Y Tu Mamá Tambien can be interpreted in numerous ways. It has been said that the director of the film portrays Luisa as a pseudo-maternal figure, in addition to being the unifier and connector between Julio and Tenoch. She becomes seen as a character who devotes herself to taking care of others, as we are informed that before she became married, she took after her aging aunt. As we see within the outdoor evening drinking scene where the 3 stay for the night after their car breaks down, Tenoch states that he also had intercourse with Julio's mom. A literal connection to the title is this exact statement that Tenoch had intercourse with Julio's mom. However, a more abstract connection, which is another way of symbolically looking at the film title, is that Luisa symbolizes a motherly figure, and as we have seen, both Julio and Tenoch previously had sex with Luisa.
In Y Tu Mamá Tambien, the setting allows us to learn more about our character's status in society. While by Mexican standards, Julio and Tenoch are both well off, there is still a social division between the two that is evident throughout the movie. This scene allows the viewers to see the difference in status between the 2 characters. This scene starts with a high-angle view into the kitchen where the maids are working. moving into a long shot where we see the maid walking through a large foyer, into another high-angle view of her walking up the stairs, and finally moving to a shot where the maid delivers Tenoch his lunch and answers the phone. These shots show off the luxurious layout of the house by following the maid, indicating that Tenoch comes from a family of wealth and power. In this scene, we are shown the layout of Julio's home, which is considerably smaller than that of Tenoch's. Julio comes from a working-class family and lives with his mother and sister. A pan shot is used to follow Julio's movements within his home. Notice how close the rooms are together and how small they are compared to Tenoch's home. This scene, like many others throughout the movie, bring the viewer's attention to political and societal issues within Mexico during this time. This scene starts with a point of view shot from inside the car of the police driving by, then changing into a pan shot as they pass by what is happening on the side of the road. The director chooses to focus on the armed police arresting the farmers for selling their products on the side of the road, but instead of hearing what is happening, a voice-off occurs of the irrelevant conversation Luisa, Tenoch, and Julio are having. This scene shows the unimportance of politics to the characters.
This scene takes place as the three protagonists, Julio, Tenoch, and Luisa, are in the car on the way to the imaginary Heaven's Mouth beach. It is a good representation of the road movie genre of the film, the third-person omniscient narrator, and the underlying socio-political themes present throughout the movie. The road movie genre is understandably exemplified in this scene as it takes place in the car as the main characters embark on an escapist journey. The boy is attempting to escape from impending adulthood, and Luisa from her failed marriage and imminent death. Traditionally, the road movie genre was centered around men escaping from the domestic sphere of influence, coming of age, and finding a new sexual freedom. However, Luisa's presence as a main character and influential force over both the boys departs from this norm to include a powerful and sexual feminine component. During this scene, the third-person omniscient narrator cuts in, also atypical of the road movie genre. When the narrator speaks, all diegetic sound is cut out and only the male voice of the narrator is heard. The narrator serves to give background on the three main characters that they do not share in their dialogue with one another, and also to tell the audience things about places and people peripheral to the storyline that the protagonists take no notice of or have no knowledge about. In this scene, the narrator talks about death, a common theme in his narration. Specifically the death of two men in this spot on the road many years ago and a grieving woman at the scene of the accident. The camera leaves the frame of the three main characters in the car and instead focuses on the roadside grave of the men, that the protagonists presumably do not notice, and later on, the poor town that they do not comment on. These aspects speak to the underlying socio-political themes in the movie. The narrator serves to give the audience a wider look at Mexico during this time, a more inclusive view than any of the protagonists have about their surroundings. The shots of the landscape and people on the side of the road reveal the less comfortable and entertaining storylines present outside of the main plot of the movie. This reflects the cinema verite style the movie is shot in, giving not just the style but the plot lines a distinct verisimilitude.
One of the moments in the film that provides the audience with a profound understanding of the characters Tenoch and Julio comes when the boys are describing their Charlastra manifesto in the car ride to the beach. The name Charlastra comes from the friends' misinterpretation of English song lyrics and can be roughly translated as Space Cowboy. The Charlastras are a group of teenagers, including Julio, Tenoch, Daniel, and several others, who are bound together by a shared set of beliefs. These beliefs, which range from the snarky, number 2, do what you feel like, to the profound, number 10, truth is cool but unattainable, govern how the boys see themselves as individuals and as single pieces in the complicated machinery of their friendship. The manifesto delineates the boys' understanding of their friendship as one that is dependent on the maintenance of several sexual commandments. Numbers 5, 6, 7, and 8 of the manifesto rely on adherence to heterosexual norms such as a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to sleeping with another Charlastra's girl, the celebration of masturbation over morals, the assertion of sexual power over a future wife, and the use of the derogatory word puto to describe someone who roots for America's soccer team. The insults and derogatory language are closely tied to the generalization that male friendship must be largely based on competition. The scene is filmed using medium tracking shots with the camera moving alongside the car so that all three people are visible at once. The camera position suggests distance between the three individuals and their friendship and the rest of the world. The back and forth between the car and the camera refers to the competition that is constantly occurring between the boys. The scene in which Tenoch and Julio describe their manifesto is followed by a bit of narration from the omniscient narrator. In this brief interlude, it is noted that the boys were tied together by an incredibly strong bond that fused them into a solid, inseparable nucleus. Though the alleged maintenance of the manifesto rules, the boys were able to cultivate a strong and lasting friendship. However, as the narrator notes, the stories that the boys told, though embellished, were integral parts to their personal mythologies. The final comment that the narrator makes hints to the crisis that will unfold when the boys reveal that they have each broken rule number 5 and have slept with each other's girlfriends. As always, the stories that they told were incomplete truths. Louisa's manifesto stands in stark contrast to that of the boys. Whereas the boys are focused on asserting their sexual dominance over women and over each other, Louisa is focused on asserting herself and her rights over the boys. Louisa's manifesto is focused on emasculating the boys by forcing them to heed to her commands. Louisa's manifesto also differs from that of the boys because her manifesto is born of frustration and comes across as a spur-of-the-moment listing off of her petty instructions, while the boys' manifesto seems to have been the result of many years of friendship and camaraderie. In many ways, Louisa's manifesto is the result of her being a strong and independent female character. Through her manifesto, Louisa asserts her power as an actively thinking female with her own desires and expectations. Louisa refuses to be nothing more than the object of Tenoch and Julio's sexual attraction and states clearly that the amount of power that she would like to have is greater than what they are giving her. Ironically, though, the boys heed to Louisa's commands merely because she is the object of their affection. They both have a sexual need to be with Louisa and are willing to sacrifice their pride to bend to her wishes if it means that Louisa will stay with them. When Louisa is describing her manifesto, she is seated in the back of the car, clearly separated from the boys both emotionally and physically. The camera switches from close shots of Louisa in the car to wide panning shots of the car on the highway. Interestingly, there's a shot of a cross on the side of the road while Louisa is describing her manifesto, which suggests that there has been a sort of loss or death. Perhaps the death of the bond that has grown between the three characters was shattered by the boys' behavior.
In this scene with the fisherman and his family, Alfonso Cuarón, the director, purposely cuts out the main characters from the shot. It's a sad prophecy of what will happen. The pigs represent American tourists, spoiling the tents and making the camp unlivable. Some say it's a reference to the spring break style, especially in places like Cancun. The fisherman is forced to stop selling fish and become a janitor at a new tourist hotel, further showing that the government is becoming more corrupt and worse for the lower class. The last scene shows both boys reuniting, and the narrator then mentions that the 71-year line is interrupted. Since the boys grew up and went their own ways, they started a new era in their lives. When the narrator states that the 71-year line of government is interrupted, it shows that the government also started a new era. The selfishness was interrupted and they no longer needed Louisa. The narrator mentions that Louisa died of cancer, something we interpreted as what was eating away at the government. The closing scenes show both parties and boys reconciliating and parting ways, again showing how the 71-year reign of government has ended.